All right, let's dive into our topic for today, which is discussing the top companies and careers for remote jobs in 2024. Here's a quick overview of what we'll be covering today. First, we'll examine some remote work trends and statistics, including some opinions and preferences from working professionals that we've collected from recent surveys. Then we will dive into some of the companies that made this year's list of FlexJob's top 100 companies for remote jobs. Next, we will examine some of the most searched for career categories and remote job terms from both the employer and the job seeker's perspective. And then we will go over some important tips to improve your effectiveness in applying for remote jobs before we close out the webinar with our live audience Q&A so that you have a chance to ask questions with one of our career experts. All right, let's get started by looking at some of the trends and preferences surrounding remote work over the last year or so. So FlexJobs, if you aren't aware, regularly surveys working professionals and job seekers about different remote work trends in order to kind of, keep our finger on the pulse of the remote work landscape. And on this slide, you'll see the results of some of those surveys that have taken place over the last few months. And a lot of what we have found, honestly, has been unsurprising, like the fact that 95% of workers want at least some type of remote work, which can include not only fully remote work, but also hybrid working arrangements or having the ability to work remotely on occasion or under special circumstances. But one statistic that was a little surprising was the fact that 63% of respondents on a recent survey shared that they prioritize remote work options higher than they prioritize salary. And again, that might be a little surprising, but a possible explanation for this could be that remote workers can typically save several thousands of dollars a year because of factors like not having to commute, which can be expensive because of buying gas or paying for public transportation. It reduces wear and tear on your vehicle if you own a car. And it also can help you make better financial decisions, like not eating out as frequently. I know that for me personally, when I was still working in person, I would eat out for lunch almost every single day. So I am able to, make better financial decisions now that I work from home. And another interesting statistic that we found from one of our surveys was that a rather high percentage of working professionals like having a hybrid working environment available to them. More still preferred fully remote work at 51% compared to 46%, but it does seem that a lot of working professionals like having the option to work both in person and remotely, which, I can understand. It's sort of a best of both worlds situation there. And then also unsurprisingly, 77% of respondents from another recent survey indicated that they believe they are more productive working remotely. And nearly all respondents of that same survey felt like remote or hybrid work had a positive impact on their mental health by providing a better work-life balance. The bottom line with all these statistics and trends is that, they clearly are indicating the popularity of remote work remains high among job seekers, which again is not all that surprising to see. But let's take a step back here a moment. It is important to make sure that we're all on the same page about what constitutes a remote job. So, for our purposes here, a remote job is essentially any professional job that will allow you to work from home either entirely or part of the time. So that means that, fully remote, hybrid, and flexible working arrangements can all be classified as remote. What a remote job is not is a fully in-person job. So that means that, companies that are implementing strict RTO or return to office mandates that don't permit any type of remote option, they could potentially be at risk of losing talent. And the reason that I say this is because one of our other recent surveys showed that 56% of working professionals know someone who has quit their job or is thinking about quitting their job because of an RTO mandate. The good news, or the silver lining there at least, is that a lot of companies that we see, in the headlines, implementing RTO mandates are allowing for a hybrid working arrangement. So it is still giving their employees at least some measure of the flexibility that they crave. It is also worth noting that over the last year, we saw a lot of kind of large scale workplace trends, like those RTO mandates that I mentioned. We saw, some layoffs and some workforce reductions, slowed hiring in certain sectors, and kind of an overall sort of cooling off of the job market, which led to a slight decrease in the overall amount of job postings, which means that there was also a decrease in the total number of remote job postings as well. However, we did actually see an 11% increase in the number of remote job listings as a percentage of overall job postings in 2023 over 2022. So that means that, remote job postings as a percentage of overall job postings, they are continuing to grow, which is promising. All right, now let's start diving into some details about our list of top companies for remote jobs in 2024. So FlexJobs actually started creating the top 100 list back in 2014. So this is our 11th installment of this list. And it was created originally for a couple reasons. Firstly, we wanted to be able to sort of recognize employers that are dedicated to providing remote and flexible work options for their employees, because not all employers truly embrace the benefits to both their employees and their organization that remote work can provide. We already touched on earlier that, remote work can provide a better work-life balance. Many people are more productive in a remote environment, and it can also have a positive impact on employees' mental well-being. But from an employer's perspective, it can also provide, cost savings by reducing overhead. It can help them attract and retain a wider range of talented professionals. It can reduce absenteeism and increase productivity, and it can even reduce their company's environmental impact, which is really a win for all of us. But an even more important reason for creating this list is because we wanted to help connect job seekers that are prioritizing remote and flexible work with companies that are offering that same type of work. Because a really helpful method of job searching is creating a target company list. This can sometimes be called the reverse job search, but essentially, you identify, or you aim to identify and monitor organizations that hire for the types of roles that you're interested in, as well as offering a work environment that aligns with your needs and preferences. So, if you are a job seeker that prioritizes remote and flexible work options, this list can be a great place to start your research for companies that you might want to add to your target list. And I just want to point out here, if you look in the resources or handouts tab there, you will see a link to the top 100 list included there. So once you are on the list, you'll notice that each company name is hyperlinked. And by clicking on the individual companies, then you can get, sort of a nice overview of that company. You can get a link to their website, and you're even able to see current and past job postings from the company that are listed on FlexJobs or have been listed on FlexJobs. So by doing that, that's kind of a good sort of jumping off point. You can then kind of determine if that company might be a good fit for you. And maybe you could then do some additional research if you think that they are a good fit, or you might just add them directly to your target list from there. But either way, the main goal here is to try to connect job seekers with companies that are offering the highest number of remote job openings in the hopes of getting you on the right path to landing a remote position if that is your desire. And in terms of how this list is developed, we actually scour data from over 60,000 companies and their job postings on FlexJobs between January 1st and December 31st of last year. So we give you, a full year's worth of data in the most recent year just completed, so that it's up-to-date data, or the most up-to-date and recent data that we have on these organizations. Okay, so moving on here on this slide, we have the top 10 companies with the most remote job postings over the last year. And you'll see there that Working Solutions took the #1 spot on our list this year, with LiveOps and CVS Health coming in second and third place, respectively. And these companies are also hiring for a fairly diverse array of positions. Just as an example, Working Solutions has hired for remote roles across consulting, project management, and sales. And Williams Sonoma, which comes in at #5, has hired for customer service, marketing, retail, and even manufacturing related roles. And we will actually go over the top 10 career categories that were posted over the last year a little later on, but that can at least kind of give you an idea of sort of the range of positions that you could find when looking for remote roles, particularly when looking at the top 100 companies here. Excuse me. And it is just, kind of interesting to me to see some of the ways that remote work has evolved over the years. It's no longer exclusive to folks who work in the technology industry, which is definitely exciting to see. It was also exciting to see this year. We had 34 new companies join our top 100 list for the first time, including some pretty large and well-known organizations. So, for me, as someone who really fully supports and advocates for remote work options, it's encouraging to see these new organizations, fully embracing remote work offerings for their employees, to the extent that they posted enough, we were able to add them to our top 100 list. So that's pretty inspiring to see, I'll say. And we also had a lot of well-known returners to our list, which is also always good to see. I think the sampling of employers on this slide, including in that bullet showing those who have appeared on this list before, helps kind of paint that picture of the variety of organizations that are embracing remote work. And like I mentioned on the last slide, it's nice that organizations outside of the more traditional remote employers are providing remote work options for job seekers. It's also great to be able to recognize some longtime advocates of remote work. These 6 employers have actually made the top 100 list every single year since it started in 2014. And like the slide that showed some of the newcomers to this year's list, we again see a mixture of different company sizes and different industry focuses. But it's pretty impressive to have any, let alone 6 employers that have made the list every single year. So very cool to see. And just to close out this section of the presentation that's focused on specific employers that made the list, I wanted to include a sampling of some other, well-known companies, institutions, and organizations with widely recognized brands. So chances are good, you might find companies that you would potentially want to work for on the top 100 list. You might even see some that are on this slide here directly. So I do definitely recommend checking out that full list in the resources section. And again, this could just help you kind of form your base of your kind of target companies list, so you can exercise some of that reverse job search strategy that I mentioned earlier. Okay, so before we move on to some best practices to keep in mind when searching and applying for remote jobs, let's first look at some of the top career categories and remote jobs from both the employer and the job seeker's perspective. Here on this slide, we have the terms that were most frequently searched for on FlexJobs by job seekers. So we have #1 there, data entry, customer service, executive assistant, marketing, project manager, accounting, education, sales, writer, and recruiter. So these were the top terms that job seekers were searching for. And the reason that I included this in the webinar is because, it's interesting to see what types of roles or job terms might be trending, but it also might spark some ideas for you to potentially examine as well. And you might think that sounds a little counterintuitive. If these are the most searched for terms, wouldn't that mean that these are also the areas or fields with the most competition? But let me actually show you on the next slide why that isn't necessarily the case. So there is a lot of crossover between the most searched for terms by job seekers on the last slide and the type of remote job postings by companies on this slide here. In fact, 7 of the top 10 between this list and the list on the previous slide overlap. The overlap includes customer service, admin or executive assistant, marketing, accounting, project manager, sales, and HR and recruiting. And I wanted to include this information so you could see the crossover, but also because it's helpful to pay attention to these types of trends or changes in the job market. Maybe you see something on this list specifically that is sort of adjacent to the type of work that you do or closely aligns with your skills and experience, but maybe you've never considered before. This type of list could give you other ideas for different types of roles to potentially target as you go along through your job search. And before I move on to the next slide, it is also worth noting that sales is one area in particular where we saw a lot of growth over the past year. So, if you're someone who's maybe a good communicator, you can be really persuasive and you enjoy talking to other people, but you've never considered a job in sales, that could be an option to potentially think about. And I just mentioned sales on the last slide as a role where we saw substantial growth, but there were also pretty noteworthy gains in computer and IT, accounting and finance, healthcare, and customer service compared to the previous year as well. And what's also interesting is looking at the career level breakdown of remote jobs posted on FlexJobs. You can see on the slide that experience level roles were by quite a large margin the most posted level of experience. We then had manager level at 19%, senior level at 12%, and entry level made up the remaining 5%. So again, we're seeing a wide range of remote options that are available to job seekers, which is good to know, given that job seekers represent a pretty broad array of industries, backgrounds, and experience levels. Okay, so before we turn to our Q&A, I want to cover a few best practices for applying to remote jobs. So hopefully it can help you as you go along through your job search efforts. As I mentioned earlier, a big reason why we create different lists of employers like this at FlexJobs is because it can be really helpful to create a list of target companies. If you are someone who's prioritizing remote jobs in your search, this type of list could be a great starting point. So, by researching the companies on this list, you can find ones that provide the type of environment that you're looking for and also hire for the roles that align well with your skills, experience, and education. And from there, you can look to see what open roles the company might have. You can follow them on our site, which would then make their open roles appear in your saved searches. You can follow them on LinkedIn, and you can even aim to network with their existing employees, which we'll talk about more later on. But when searching just in a general sense for remote roles, it's also really helpful to utilize the advanced search features on different job search websites. For instance, like we have listed there on the slide, FlexJobs allows you to set different remote work levels so you can find options that are closest to your preferences. But most job search sites have filters that will at least allow you to select on-site or remote. So make sure that you use those filters wisely and effectively. It's also really helpful when applying to remote jobs to make sure that you're conveying your ability to perform effectively in a remote environment. The first thing you want to consider is if you have had any remote experience that could be included on your resume. And keep in mind that this doesn't have to be traditional remote workplace experience. It can include things like taking online courses. Maybe you worked remotely temporarily, like many of us did during the height of the pandemic, or even, maybe you work with distributed teams or you meet with clients using different like video conferencing platforms or maybe messaging systems. Along those same lines, it's also a good idea to include a technology skills section on your resume where you're highlighting your technical proficiencies, particularly with different remote communication and collaboration tools like Zoom, Google Meet, Dropbox, Slack, Microsoft Teams. Things like that are good to include on your resume. And then also think about the type of transferable skills or soft skills, as they're sometimes called, that are valuable in a remote environment. Things like communication, collaboration, time management, and problem solving are all highly important when working on a remote team. You do want to keep in mind, though, that simply listing these skills on your resume isn't really enough. You should also aim to include in your bullet points some examples of the ways that you've used those skills and the positive results you've achieved when using those skills. So to give you an example, if I simply listed like problem solving as a key skill on my resume without actually providing any examples of how I've effectively resolved problems or how those solutions that I've implemented have led to positive outcomes, who is going to actually believe me that I'm a good problem solver? So you want to kind of take that show, don't just tell sort of approach. So make sure that you are giving some context and including some of those, results as well. And one other important thing to note is that it's also really helpful to try to tailor your resume for each individual application. As you're reviewing job descriptions, pay attention to what the employer is looking for in potential candidates, and then, make modifications to your resume so that you're showcasing relevant skills, experience, and accomplishments from your background that will align most closely with the employer's needs. Basically, I often tell job seekers, think about your audience. You want to think about what your audience is looking for and what is going to resonate and be impactful to them. And a pretty effective method for doing this, or at least to help save you time when tailoring, is to focus your tailoring efforts on your professional summary section at the top of your resume. That way you can kind of quickly catch the employer's attention with that relevant information. Another really good strategy to use when applying for jobs, especially if you've created that list of target companies like we talked about earlier, is to try to network. Using social media platforms, especially ones that are more geared towards working professionals like LinkedIn, that can help you find others who are doing the type of work that you want to be doing and working for the types of companies that you would like to work for. And once you identify some target connections or some potential target connections, you can start to follow them on LinkedIn. You could engage with their posts if they post things on LinkedIn, and try to begin sort of cultivating a relationship. And eventually, as you continue to interact with them more, then you could potentially ask them if they'd be open to answering some questions about what they do or where they work. And if they're willing, you could potentially gain some really helpful advice and continue to grow that relationship to the point where maybe you're even possibly obtaining a referral for an open role at their company. But, it's really a good strategy to employ. I always tell folks, worst case scenario, they just don't respond. Best case scenario, you get some really good information and potentially a referral to an open role. So definitely a strategy worth employing. But when you are trying to leverage this approach, it is really important to make sure that, your profile is fully optimized, meaning that, they contain information about you and your experience that is relevant to your target audiences, like we mentioned on the last slide, and that you're also keeping everything, professional and appropriate. And as you are cultivating relationships with, target connections, make sure that you're also branding yourself as someone who is, helpful, supportive, thoughtful, courteous, and also passionate about your type of work or your industry. Essentially you want to, portray yourself as someone who others will want to connect with. If you're just kind of clearly trying to connect with people solely so that you can get favors or, asking help from people without first taking the time to cultivate a relationship, it's very likely that you're just going to get ignored. So you really want to kind of lay that groundwork, so to speak, before really trying to, assertively connect with people or ask people if they'll answer questions or help you in any type of way. And then as you start to, hopefully apply for jobs, network with people, and land interviews for open roles, it is extremely important that you are effectively preparing for those interviews. Preparation will not only help you perform well during the interview, but it can also give you a nice confidence boost going into that interview. And while there are some distinct differences between remote and in-person interviews, a lot of your preparation efforts will be the same. Regardless of the type of interview, your preparation should include things like analyzing the job description really carefully, thinking about how your experience aligns with what you're reading in that job description, researching the company to find out more about their product and service offerings and their mission, considering common and role-specific interview questions and how you might respond, preparing some relevant stories or examples from your past that could highlight your fit for that specific role, and also practicing some responses out loud. You could do that either, in the mirror, you could record yourself on your phone or your computer, or you could practice in sort of a mock interview with a friend or a mentor or a career coach. But there are also some unique aspects of remote interviews that you definitely want to keep in mind. The first is to figure out, sort of what type of interview you'll be conducting, and then make sure that you know what technology you'll be using ahead of time. And the type of interview and the technology that you'll be using can vary depending on the round of interview that you might be on. For example, phone screens and one-way interviews where you're answering questions while recording yourself on camera, those are typically reserved for sort of the first round of interviews. And you also might encounter some text-based interviews in the first round, though those are a bit more rare. But like video conferencing interviews with Zoom or Google Meet, those tend to be reserved for second round and beyond, and are probably the most common type of interview that you'll encounter when applying for remote roles. But either way, try to find out what type of tech you'll be using and see if you can kind of test it out ahead of time, along with making sure that your internet signal is strong, and then try to have a backup plan in place, like maybe setting up a hotspot in your home, and downloading whatever type of video conferencing app onto your phone in case you need it. Okay, so to close out our webinar or the presentation before we move on to our Q&A, let's close out here with some action steps and reminders to keep in mind going forward. So, first and foremost, you want to kind of familiarize yourself with companies that are offering the type of work that you want to be doing in the type of environment in which you want to be working. From those companies, you then want to begin to develop, your idea of target roles and target companies that you want to focus on in your job search, so you can employ that reverse job search that we've talked about. As you are applying for roles, you want to make sure that you are demonstrating, your remote abilities. Make sure that you are tailoring your application materials effectively, and then also trying to, network with people who are working at your target companies. And then lastly, as you hopefully begin to land interviews, make sure that you are preparing thoroughly, and that you fully understand sort of the nuances of those different types of interviews you might encounter for remote roles. Okay, so we are going to go ahead and move on to our Q&A portion of the webinar now. Just as a reminder, a copy of the recording as well as resources that were discussed during the presentation will be emailed to you within the next week. Do be sure to check your spam folder just in case it gets filtered there. For even more tips, tricks, and resources, I do recommend going to the FlexJobs blog. You'll see the URL there on the screen. It includes a vast amount of free articles, resources, webinars, and videos for members and non-members. Now let's go ahead and open up to your questions. Please remember to type them in the Q&A section rather than the chat section, and feel free to give a thumbs up to anyone else's question that you would like to hear the answer to as well. All right, everyone, we are going to move into the Q&A portion of our webinar now. Before we dive into your questions, could someone let me know in the chat section that you're able to hear me clearly? All right, wonderful. Thank you for that. So, my name is Keith Spencer, and I'm one of our career experts here at FlexJobs, and I will be answering your questions today. So, starting with our question that has the most upvotes, this person is talking about that they've had a problem with two interviews now where they were asking for IDs and it wanted them to be sent through Microsoft Teams. How can I make sure that it's an actual interview and not a scam? Yeah, really, really good question there because scammers do tend to try to target people that are looking for remote jobs because it just tends to be a little bit easier because there's never that onus to meet with someone face to face. You do want to be careful there. We have a lot of good resources on detecting and avoiding scams. I will make sure that we add some, excuse me, to the resources that are going to be sent to you when we send out a link to the recording of this webinar. So we'll make sure you get some details there. But in terms of this specific question, companies will eventually want some details from you. Copies of your IDs and things like that. Once they have hired you, they need that information to confirm your eligibility to work and your location of residence and things like that. But they will typically, legitimate companies will not ask for that information until you have accepted and signed an offer and then are doing your onboarding paperwork. And also too, to ask for that type of thing through Microsoft Teams, that would definitely be raising some red flags for me because companies will usually ask you to send that information through through some type of secure software, whether it's like DocuSign, or if they have a specific like HR management tool that they use where you could upload your IDs through that. It's usually through some legitimate means that they are asking you to submit your ID. So if you are early on, like you're still interviewing and they're asking you to send IDs, I would be very, very cautious there. But like I said, we'll send out some information on how you can avoid scams and protect yourself from scams. But really, just make sure that you're kind of vetting these people, these organizations. If someone's reaching out to you, especially if they're reaching out with like an unsolicited job offer where you never actually applied for something, like make sure that you're looking them up, looking up the company, trying to make sure that they are who they say they are, because some of these people out there find it much easier to scam people that are looking for remote jobs. So you definitely want to protect yourself and try to vet companies and people that you are encountering. But like I said, we'll send out some resources on that. But yes, be very, very careful sharing IDs through Microsoft Teams. That would definitely be a red flag for me. But good question, and thank you for asking that. Okay, moving on to our next one. How do I stand out versus the thousands of others that are applying for the same job? Yeah, really good question. The percentage of remote jobs as a portion of overall job postings, can be fairly limited, and that means that there tends to be pretty high competition for some of these remote jobs. So you want to make sure that you are, taking some extra steps to help yourself stand out from the competition. So a couple things that were, mentioned in that presentation that are worth reiterating, tailoring for specific job postings, really making sure that you are, analyzing that job posting, really, understanding what it is that they need from someone in this role, and then accurately reflecting that information through your application materials. I personally do this strategy where I call it kind of my master resume strategy, where every time I'm job searching, there is usually somewhere between like 2 to 5 different types of roles that I am targeting. So I will create a master resume, I call it, for each one of those types of roles. So, for example, I might be targeting something that is related to what I do now with like career development and providing career advice. And then I also started my career as a teacher. So let's say I'm job searching and I am looking for those two types of roles, teacher jobs and career development jobs. I would have two resumes that have the same jobs listed on both of those resumes, but describing them differently, like focusing on different skills that I used, focusing on different accomplishments that I achieved, focusing on different, responsibilities that I held as they relate to those different types of roles. So right there, I am tailoring for those types of roles. That is already going to help me stand out from other people that are not taking that effort to tailor for those types of roles. Then going beyond that, when I find a specific job that I want to apply for, I pick the appropriate master resume, I make a copy of it, and then I will tailor it even further for that specific position, focusing the bulk of my tailoring efforts on that professional summary section at the top of my resume, because that's the first section that the recruiter or hiring manager is going to read, theoretically at least. So, really taking that time to tailor my resume for that position, tailor my cover letter for that position. I'm making sure that I have researched the company, that I understand that job description well. I am looking to see, could I be following this company on LinkedIn or other social media platforms? I'm looking to see if I can find someone who works as a recruiter for that company or maybe in talent acquisition. And then I try to reach out to them after I've applied. If it's a company that's on my target list, chances are good that I've already tried to find recruiters in that company and have been following them on LinkedIn for a while, probably commenting on their posts, trying to build a relationship with them so that when I do apply for a job with their company, I can then, reach out to them because I've already established a relationship. These are all the things that you could be doing that will help you stand out, really taking the time to tailor, follow, companies and recruiters that are on your target list, follow up with them once you've applied. All of those things can help you stand out from the crowd, because I can, promise you that not everyone in the thousands of applicants that you see applying for that role is going to do that. And then I will also say one other thing, when we're thinking about different job search sites like LinkedIn, for example, you often see a job posted and then it'll say, see how you stack up against, 2,000 other candidates. Well, that number is misleading. Don't let that number discourage you. That number counts anybody who has clicked the apply, for this job button and just gets to, see the application. Then it doesn't mean they actually filled out the entire application and submitted it. It's just anybody who clicked that button. So try not to let that number discourage you when you see it, but do make sure that regardless of number of applicants, that you are taking the time to do all the right things. I always, always, always will recommend the quality over quantity approach when it comes to applying for jobs. I would much rather apply to just one or two jobs a day where I am really making sure that I'm submitting a high quality application than trying to apply for dozens or hundreds of jobs in a single day. Quality over quantity. Keep that in mind. But really good question. It was a broad one, so I know my answer was kind of long there. So I do apologize for that. But thank you for taking the time to ask that. Okay, let's see here. Um, All right, our next one here, it looks like, how do I ensure that a position is fully remote and doesn't become hybrid post hire? Yes, so that is a really good question. I have heard some horror stories, so to speak, of companies kind of pulling a little bit of like the bait and switch on people, which is not okay in my mind. But yeah, so I would recommend, if you find a position, really make sure that you're looking carefully at the job posting. I have seen instances where a job, on certain job search sites, might be listed as remote, but then as you go through the job description, you end up seeing that they mention that it's a hybrid or an on-site position. So pay careful attention to the job descriptions. Also research the company. You can look to see like, okay, is this a company that actually is hiring for remote roles? Like you could use, there's a website out there called like the Flex Jobs Index that has a lot of information on different companies. Glassdoor, other different sites where you can read reviews from current or former employees. Doing that type of research can help you find out whether or not that organization does actually hire for fully remote jobs. Looking to see if you can find other remote job postings, or if you're finding a lot of hybrid job postings or on-site job postings for that organization. That can help you kind of weed through whether or not that company is legitimately hiring for remote roles. So that would be my recommendation. Just making sure that you're doing that extra kind of vetting. Same kind of thing when we talked about scams, like taking the time to do that extra vetting can help you make sure that you are, finding legitimate postings there. But good question. And like I said, any company that's doing that, it's not okay to see that. Hopefully they are not doing it intentionally to be misleading. It's that, maybe a recruiter posted that job, and then somewhere higher up the ladder at their C suite, somebody made a policy change or something like that, so they weren't being intentionally misleading. I like to give folks and give companies the benefit of the doubt if I'm only encountering that for the first time. But very good question there. Okay, so another one here. So many of the companies that this person is seeing are requiring a date of birth on their applications, and then aren't responding to people who are, maybe a little bit more advanced in age. This person is saying, they are semi-retired corporate executive who is both mentally and physically fit. How can they get past the age issue? So let me make a note to myself here, because another resource that we can send out, or actually no, so well, yeah, so I'll send out some resources on ageism. But another thing that you can look is there is. So I mentioned in the presentation how looking at different lists and things like this can help you find some target companies. There is a organization out there called the Age Friendly Institute that they certify employers that are age friendly. So that could be a good list to check out. If you just go to a search engine and type in the Age Friendly Institute, you should be able to find that organization specifically. But looking at organizations that are age friendly can be a good place to start. I would recommend, so in terms of your initial part of your question here, an organization requiring a date of birth on there. I'm not sure if you are based in the United States or not. It is illegal to discriminate based on age in the US, in many other countries as well. It is not illegal to necessarily ask for information that could, potentially signify what your age is, but most companies will avoid asking that, or a lot of companies will avoid asking that because it could, put them in a precarious situation then, where someone could feel as though they are being discriminated against. But back to sort of my recommendations here, a couple things that you could do if you are not comfortable answering that question, or a similar question they might ask your year of graduation. You could put all zeros for your answer or something like that, so that you're able to still answer that question, but you're kind of bypassing it by not answering it exactly. So that could be an option for you. You could still answer that question and just kind of hope for the best there. I recommend, in terms of your resume, couple things that you could do to avoid some of those biases related to ageism. You want to get to the interview process. You want them to at least get you to that interview process, because then you have the opportunity to actually speak with them and show that you have a lot of value to bring. You're not just your age. Essentially, you have all this experience and skills and accomplishments that you bring to the table as well. So you could only go back about 10 to 15 years in your professional experience section. If you have any degrees or things like that, you could remove your dates of graduation so that that's not included. Really just trying to emphasize your ability over your age, because the age should be irrelevant. It's really, the experience and the skills and the expertise that you bring to the table. So focusing on that, but using a list like the Age Friendly Institute could be a good place to start your search. So good question there, and I do appreciate you taking the time to ask that. Let's try to fit in one or two others here. Let's see. All right, here's another good question. So this one is related to what we talked about with tailoring your application. So this person is saying, if you tailor your resume for each application, what then do you do with your LinkedIn, which employers are likely going to cross check? So yes, same information should be included on both your resume and your LinkedIn, but the way that you describe, those past jobs and those past experiences that you've had, it will likely be different. So, your LinkedIn, that's going to be, broader, more general. So I gave the example earlier of like my master resume strategy where I have, different resumes tailored to different types of roles. Everything that I've done is going to be included on my LinkedIn, or my LinkedIn is going to speak a bit more generally to all those different types of roles that I would potentially be eligible and looking for. So, use your LinkedIn, or craft a LinkedIn that is going to be more broad, more general, more appealing to a wider audience. And then your individual resumes, those are going to be tailored more narrowly to specific job postings. So, very, very good point there. But, still be thinking about like, okay, what are my target roles? And then, speak to, your skills that align with those different types of roles in your LinkedIn, or any other kind of online profiles there. But yes, very, very good question. And I appreciate you taking the time to ask that. Let's see. Okay, let's try to fit in this last one here. Um, so this person is asking, they have worked their whole life. They know that they can do the work required for a lot of, entry level remote jobs. But their resume, the problem is their resume often doesn't reflect all the requirements in the job listing. How do you get your skills across in a cover letter, or convince an employer to take a chance on you, or at least get to an interview when past experience is not completely aligned with the position? So this kind of goes back to what we were talking about with tailoring. Think about from the employer's perspective, the job description that they are putting out there, that is their ideal wish list. They do not reasonably expect everyone that applies to have 100% of what they're looking for. But you do need to, describe the experience and the skills that you have that are going to be relevant to that employer. So to give an example, I mentioned I started out my career as a social studies, or excuse me, as a teacher. I was a middle school social studies teacher. Then when I made the jump to career development, I basically analyzed that job posting and showed how I had a lot of skills as a teacher that would make me effective in that career development role. I was basically saying like, listen, with the exception of the career development content, which I can learn very, very quickly, I have everything that you're looking for. So, you want to not just have that one general resume that just describes your past experiences in a general way and submit that for every type of job. If you're trying to kind of change jobs, or if you have sort of a diverse array of experiences from the past, you want to be doing that tailoring that we were talking about, maybe leveraging that master resume strategy that I mentioned, so that you are describing the things that you have done in different ways, so that it will, be applicable and relate or resonate with different audiences. You would focus on the different types of skills that you've used in different jobs as they relate to what your audience wants to see. And again, leverage that job description as sort of your guide to what your audience wants to see. I often, recommend thinking of the job description as like your cheat sheet. Like the employer is literally giving you the answers to the test with that job description, and they want you to use the answers to the test. So use that job description to tailor your application materials to that individual job posting. That's the way that you can kind of get around, your experience not being in exact alignment. Now, you do give the example in your question here, not having like a Bachelor of Arts degree or not having a degree or something like that. Do keep in mind that typically employers will kind of differentiate in their job descriptions between preferred qualifications and required qualifications. If you're only missing like one or two of the required qualifications, still, probably going to be a solid fit for that role. If you're missing a lot of required qualifications, then you might want to pass on applying for that position and look for another one. The preferred qualifications, employers tend to be more flexible with those. We usually tell people to go with like the 60 to 70% rule as kind of your baseline. If you're reading a job description, you can confidently say, okay, I have done or can do at least 60 to 70% of what they're looking for. Then it tends to be worth applying for. So hopefully that is helpful for you. I know that is a challenging situation to be in. Looking for roles that are going to be a bit more closely aligned with the experience that you do have. That could be a good sort of tactic to take as you are developing your list of kind of target roles and target companies that hire for those types of roles. Okay, we are quite a few minutes over our allotted time, so we're going to go ahead and draw to a close here. Really appreciate you all taking the time to be here and asking such insightful questions. I know we didn't get to all the questions that were included there. I do apologize that, but we have a lot of people joining us here today. So understandably asking a lot of questions, but really do appreciate you taking the time to be here. We will send out a link to that recording as mentioned, as well as all the resources that are in the handout section. And then I will add a few more based on the topics that were brought up with your questions. So thank you again for being here. Really hope that this was helpful for you, and hope the Q&A portion was helpful as well. And I wish you all the best of luck with your job search. Take care.